Not the lessons, not the grades. What keeps many students coming back to the school is a room where no words are spoken. Not everyone knows this, but at the end of the west hallway in a small high school in Oregon, there's a pale white door, unmarked, unlocked, and rarely knocked on. The room behind it, just over 10 square meters, used to be a storage closet, but one day, it became a refuge for kids whose inner fractures no one had noticed in time. The room was given an unofficial name, the Silent Room. It all began one autumn, when red maple leaves blanketed the schoolyard and a fine drizzle blurred the window panes. That was when Miss Emily, a literature teacher in her 30s with a voice as soft as breath, started noticing the silences in her classroom. Not the kind that came from focus, but the hollow kind, where empty eyes stare at nothing in particular, gazes drifting as if hiding from a world they couldn't name. One afternoon, while grading essays on the topic My Home, Emily paused for a long time at one paper. The handwriting was uneven. The sentence read, "Home is where I stay silent to feel safe. I wish there was a place where I could speak or not speak at all and not get scolded." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She remembered her own childhood, curled up behind the kitchen cupboard, while her parents fought, and the yelling made the house tremble like a small storm. She knew the weight of having to suppress everything, to pretend, to grow up in silence. Not everyone survived their childhood, and those who do often carry scars no one sees. A few days later, after school hours, Emily quietly entered the old storage room at the end of the hall. She swept the floor, dusted the shelves, laid down a sitting mat, some cushions, a small bookshelf, and a plain wooden box. On the wall, she taped a single note. "This is a place where you can sit, write, breathe, cry, or just be quiet. No one will ask why." No announcements were made in the school bulletin. No emails were sent to parents. But one day, a student found the room. Her name was Lily, a 10th grader who always sat at the back of class with her hoodie pulled low. She walked in, sat down, said nothing, then left. The next day, she returned, this time with a notebook. She wrote something, then left it in the wooden box. Inside, she'd scribbled, "Thank you for creating a place where I don't have to be strong." The story of the Silent Room didn't spread like a trend. There were no hashtags, no selfies. But somehow, those who needed it found it. An 11th grade boy who often got into fights on the school lawn. A 9th grade student who kept shaving their head to not look like anyone else. A girl who never turned in homework but always drew vibrant pictures in the book margins. All of them eventually passed through that doorway, each leaving behind a small piece of themselves. A long sigh, a scribbled line, a note folded 4 ways that simply read, "I don't know if I'm okay, but I'm trying." For a long time, school has been a place of training, testing, and standardization. But the Silent Room didn't grade anyone. It didn't ask for report cards or question whether your sadness was valid. It simply existed, like an open palm quietly extended in a crowd, to catch someone who was about to fall. And on windy days, when the hallway echoes with hurried footsteps and laughter drowns out everything else, one thing still happens in silence. That little room stays lit. People still come and go, each carrying away a small part of their heart, reignited. No one calls it a miracle, but sometimes even the smallest things can hold someone back from the edge just because they listened. Ethan began coming to the Silent Room regularly toward the end of winter. He didn't write, didn't read, and never brought anything with him, except a blank stare and hands always buried deep in the pockets of his hoodie. Emily didn't ask questions. She simply kept the door open and, at times, quietly placed a warm cup of tea on the table by the window, just left it there. Some days Ethan noticed, some days he didn't, but he kept coming, as regularly as a wound that hadn't healed and needed to be redressed each day. One gray Tuesday afternoon, with the rain softly falling, Ethan suddenly spoke. For the first time in over 3 weeks of silence. "If I tell you this, you can't tell anyone." His voice was dry, but his eyes trembled. Emily set down her book and nodded. She didn't know what was about to be said, but she knew it wouldn't be light. There's someone who died, and I'm not sure if it's my fault. Ethan spoke in a rush, as if stopping meant he'd never be able to say it. Last year, when I still lived in another state. Emily tightened her hand around the page she hadn't turned. The room felt like a vacuum. Only the sound of rain tapping against the glass remained. Ethan pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. It was a photo of a phone screen, a message. The last line read, "I'm going to try jumping. It's okay if you don't reply." The timestamp, 1:12 a.m. The next message, number does not exist. Emily didn't ask who sent it. She didn't say, "It's not your fault." She simply set the paper on the table and said, "You didn't know you'd have to grow up so fast, did you?" Ethan let out a half laugh, twisted with pain. I thought, if I hadn't turned off my phone, if I had just replied, maybe he didn't finish the sentence. Emily looked at the boy, no longer hiding the storm inside, no longer masked in indifference, just a kid trying to survive something far too big. In the weeks that followed, Ethan kept coming, but he brought more with him. A small notebook, a pen, an old photo. In the photo, two boys sat playing guitar beneath a damp porch roof. One of them was Ethan. The other, Emily knew, was the one who was gone. Ethan didn't speak much, but his eyes were no longer empty, just full of grief. At the end of March, as daffodils bloomed across the school lawn, Emily was called into the board meeting room. She didn't expect anything unusual, but what awaited her was an anonymous letter sent to school accusing the silent room of encouraging students to avoid reality, triggering negative emotions, and posing a risk to students' mental health. The sender didn't sign their name, but attached were excerpts from the letters left in the wooden box. Some lines could easily be misunderstood. "I've thought about dying many times, but I haven't done it because I still have this place." Or, "I'm so tired. If I don't come to school tomorrow, maybe no one will notice." Emily's hands clenched. She remembered each of those lines. She remembered the faces behind them, and she knew every single one was an act of survival. But the school board didn't see that. They saw risk, liability, and the potential for a media scandal. A week later, the principal announced that the silent room would be temporarily closed pending an impact assessment. Emily was instructed to stop supervising the room and avoid private discussions with students about personal issues. The notice arrived on a Monday morning, just as Emily was brewing tea. She nodded, didn't object, but something inside her collapsed, like a wall crumbling inward. Rumors spread quickly. Students began to ask, "Did Ms. Emily do something wrong? Where's the silent room? Where do we go now when we're not okay?" A few students spoke out online, defending Emily, but some parents criticized. "Teachers are not therapists. If my child gets more depressed because their emotions are being dug up, who's responsible?" Ethan said nothing. He disappeared for 3 days. On the 4th, Emily saw him standing alone in the schoolyard beneath the daffodil tree. He didn't go to class, didn't speak, but when their eyes met, Emily knew he was falling. That evening, Ethan sent her an email. There were no complaints in it, just a single line. "Do you know what I once left in the wooden box in the corner? A shoelace. The kind I was going to use a year ago, but I left it there because I thought if the day ever came that I needed it again, at least it would still be somewhere someone was guarding." Emily broke down in tears in her small kitchen, not because the room had been shut down, but because of something much simpler. The people making the decisions would never read that email. 3 weeks later, another student, Ava, was taken to the nurse's office after a panic attack. She had tried to hurt herself after being cyberbullied. Ava had once been one of the most frequent writers in the silent room. She once said, "Only when I write can I hear my own voice." Now, that voice had been drowned out. The school launched an investigation. Emily wasn't charged with anything, but she was warned, Behavior exceeding the role of a teacher is not encouraged. Emily didn't respond, but when she got home, she wrote a long letter, not to anyone, just to place in a drawer. One passage read, "If the only thing I did wrong was listen too closely, then I'd do it wrong again." At the end of the school year, Ethan disappeared. No one knew if he transferred, was expelled, or chose to leave. In June, Emily received a package. Inside was a notebook, old and frayed. On the first page, it said, "To the teacher of those who haven't yet found the words to save themselves." No one else knew about the notebook. Emily placed it in the cabinet where she used to keep tea for the students. Inside, Ethan had written the story of himself and a friend he lost, not as a confession, but as a half-finished memoir of two souls who had wandered off course. One who stopped midway, one who kept walking on scarred feet. That summer, the school was repainted. The old room was demolished to expand the administrative wing. No trace remained of the silent room, but as the workers tore down the wall, they found something. A slip of paper taped behind an old picture frame, handwritten on it. "If one day someone listens long enough, you'll find a way out yourself." No one knew who wrote it. No one saved it. But Emily remembered clearly. It was Ava's handwriting. The girl once pulled back from a dark choice simply because she had a place to write it down. Summer passed quickly, but something inside Emily hadn't settled. She returned to school in early August to prepare for the new year. The old room was now labeled the Academic Counseling Office, outfitted with new wooden desks and sleek black leather chairs, clean and regulation approved. A bulletin board hung neatly on the wall, outlining the official counseling procedures, QR codes, schedules, and step-by-step instructions. Everything was tidy. Everything was lawful. Everything except the truth. A week later, when staff were assigned their new roles, Emily was moved to teach 9th grade. The incoming freshman. She gave a faint smile when she saw the change. "You seem to have a natural connection with the younger students," the principal said gently. But Emily knew this was the administration's way of redefining her role, a quiet repositioning for someone no longer fully trusted. On the first day of class, Emily walked into a room full of scraping chairs and chaotic laughter. Amid the crowd, she noticed a boy with messy curls sitting in the corner, staring out the window, disconnected. He didn't talk, didn't open his book, just gazed outward. There was something achingly familiar. Emily didn't ask, but she felt it, a sadness waiting to be named. That afternoon, as class ended, the boy was the last to leave. Just before stepping through the door, he paused and turned. "Were you the one who used to run a room with a red mat?" he asked softly. Emily didn't respond right away. Her throat tightened. "I heard about it from my brother," the boy added, then walked away. Her heart clenched as if someone had twisted a memory back into place. She didn't need to ask. She knew who he was, Ethan's younger brother. That night, Emily opened Ethan's old notebook again. Near the final pages, he had written, "I used to think I was the end of something bad, but now I want to believe I could be the beginning of something else, something better, even if it's just by staying long enough for someone else to be saved." Emily turned on her desk lamp and wrote a note on a small piece of paper. "If you ever need a place to be quiet, I'm still here." The next day, she slipped it into the desk of the curly-haired boy. No signature. 3 days later, the boy turned in a short essay, an assignment on the safest place you've ever imagined. In it, he described a small room, no questions asked, no judgments, a place where someone always left hot tea ready. Even if you didn't drink it, that was okay. No one else in the class understood his essay, but Emily did. That same week, she began opening her classroom 15 minutes early each day. No announcement, no invitation. Just come in if you're early. At first, 1 or 2 students showed up. Then 5, then 10. Some sat quietly, some yawned, some read comics. But no one was loud, and Emily, as always, simply let them be. One crisp autumn morning, a student placed a cup of tea on her desk. "You might need this," they said. Emily smiled, said nothing, but her hand trembled just slightly. It was peppermint tea, the same kind she used to leave in the silent room. There were still no messages from Ethan. She didn't know if he was still out there, or if he truly vanished. But each time she saw his brother's eyes or heard a student whisper, "I feel a little better today," Emily understood. Not everything needs to end to prove its worth. One day, while clearing off her desk, she found a small note tucked into a workbook. The handwriting was clumsy and unsure. "I've never seen anyone listen like you do. I don't know what I need, but at least here, I don't have to pretend." Emily folded the note and placed it in her wallet. Then she stood, pulled open the curtains, and let the sunlight flood the classroom. No signs, no labels, but she knew a room could be dismantled. But once a quiet corner has been planted in someone's heart, it grows again wherever it's needed. By the time the first semester was halfway through, Emily began to notice something she'd never expected. She was tired. Not the kind of tired that came from teaching lessons or grading papers, but a quiet exhaustion, the kind that builds when you walk, day after day, into a system that no longer feels like it belongs to you. Each morning, she still opened her classroom early, brewed tea, and set out a few books. But sometimes, watching the students sit quietly reading or writing, she felt like she was tending a garden she was no longer allowed to name. What she was doing wasn't forbidden, but it lived at the margins. She wasn't called into the office anymore, but she wasn't acknowledged either. Between existing and being accepted, Emily felt herself floating. One late afternoon, after class, Emily received an email. The sender was anonymous, just a strange address. The subject line read, "I'm still alive." Inside was a short note. "Ms. Emily, if anyone ever saved me without tying me down with debts or promises, it was you. I didn't choose death. I also didn't find a good life right away. But I'm somewhere in between and I'm still walking. I think maybe that's enough." At the bottom, it was signed simply, E. Emily sat in the darkened classroom without turning on the lights. The evening shadows stretched across the floor, reaching up the wall where students had once doodled and quickly erased. That dim light reminded her of the silent room, the way morning sun used to pour into one corner, casting long lines across a window that never closed. The next day, she submitted a request for a 1-month leave. The reason? Emotional exhaustion. No one asked further. Perhaps they assumed she was preparing to leave for good. A few colleagues sent polite texts, wishing you a quick recovery. But Emily knew she wasn't seeking recovery. She was seeking silence. She drove north, leaving Oregon behind, past dense forests, foggy valleys, and quiet little towns. Each night, she stopped at an old roadside inn and wrote a few lines in her notebook, to no one in particular. "I used to think saving someone had an end point, but maybe it's simply being allowed to stand beside them in a moment when they choose to live." On the 12th day, she arrived in a lakeside village. There was a small library that opened only 3 hours a day, a coffee shop with old books for customers to read, and a community bulletin board covered in handwritten flyers. Free yoga classes, children's reading hours, creative writing groups for seniors. She stepped into the library and spoke with the elderly librarian. They talked about Mary Oliver's poetry and about children who never borrowed books but still came every afternoon, just to sit. The librarian looked at Emily for a long moment and asked, "Were you ever a teacher?" Emily nodded. The old woman smiled. "I thought so. Only teachers look at a quiet child and see it for what it really is, a kind of asking for help." Emily laughed, for the first time in weeks. 3 days later, Emily found a small plot of land for rent near the lake. There was an abandoned wooden cabin on it. The roof leaked, but it was still standing. The owner said, "No one stays there long. Too quiet." Emily smiled. "I think I'll give it a try." The next month, she began cleaning the cabin, a little each day, clearing out trash, patching the roof, placing a bookshelf, hanging soft white curtains. No one asked her what she was building, but one day, a village girl around 12 peeked in and asked, "Are you opening a place to read?" Emily replied softly, "I'm opening a place where you don't have to say anything." The girl nodded and walked away. But the next day, she came back with a notebook and a pen. Soon, a few other children came too. Not many, never loud. Emily didn't teach anything. She just sat there, placed a pot of tea in the center of the room, and listened if anyone wanted to speak. If not, that was okay too. The house had no name, but the children called it the White Room because of the white curtains, the white tablecloth, and the soft, weightless feeling that filled the air like wind drifting off the lake. Emily didn't know how long she would stay. Maybe a few months, maybe forever. But she knew one thing. Even if a room is closed, even if a space is torn down, once you've opened a door for someone, that door will find a way to open again, in another place, for another person, at a moment you never expected. You don't have to save the whole world. Maybe just keeping one quiet space alive for one more day is already enough. You don't always have to do something grand to save someone. Sometimes, all it takes is opening up a quiet space and having enough patience to wait for them to walk in. The story of Ms. Emily in the silent room isn't just a small piece of a noisy school. It's a quiet but powerful reminder that behind every student's face is an inner world, one that adults often don't pause long enough to truly see. In a system built on performance, metrics, and order, the act of listening sometimes becomes an act of courage. And people like Emily, though not called therapists or heroes, are the ones quietly keeping the flame alive for souls on the verge of going dark. We may never know if the silent room will still be remembered years from now, but we do know this. Those who found healing there will carry a part of that light with them, wherever they go. If you've ever had a moment of weakness in your life, and someone simply sat with you in silence, patiently, without fixing, share that story in the comments. You never know. What you once survived might be the light someone else is searching for. What did this story stir in you? What moment hit you the hardest? Leave a thought or simply write, "I'm here," so we all know we're not alone. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it meant something to you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with someone who might need a quiet place today. Healing isn't always bright or dramatic, but it's always real, and you don't have to walk it alone.